Thank you for coming here. Welcome to the session on revolutionizing insurance. There are several ways, of course, to do it. Today, we are going to see how we can leverage innovation to drive growth in a company. Now, I would argue that if we look at all the industry verticals around us, insurance is perhaps the most primed for transformations in the industry. Why? Because it's rich with data, it's shaped by risk, and it's driven by trust. So it's at this intersection of technical disruption on one side and societal need on the other side. It's amazing that a large population of the world is still uninsured. So where is growth going to come from? We've got inefficiencies in legacy systems that are ripe for automation. So yes, we are going to see a lot of platform modernization and automation. There is untapped potential of personalization. People hop around so much because their needs are not met. And there is a growing need for inclusion as well as resilience. If you look at the last few years, so many of the PNCs have gone in the red thanks to the climatic changes, the number of floods and risks and hurricanes. And so, of course, with this kind of disruption, there is bound to be innovation. Talking about climate, there is a new offering, a new kind of insurance called parametric insurance. Maybe some of you already use it. So what happens there is you've got events which are correlated with the geospatial data of the policyholders. So imagine when there's a catastrophe, there's such a flurry of activity, isn't it better that the person who's affected already, the insurance company, the carrier already knows, and the payout comes to their bank so that it's a little easier on them. And yes, this is already happening today. Another form of innovation is an embedded innovation. So for instance, if you are at a point of purchase for a service or a product, you're offered an insurance. Today, if you're to travel, you're offered travel insurance, which is a little personalized for you from point A to point B, depending on your circumstances. And similarly, if you buy a Tesla, you buy something else more expensive, the insurance comes with it. And we are seeing, these are just two examples, but they are leading indicators of how the industry is shaping. If you look at the drafts or the visions of EY and the Deloittes and McKinseys of the world, they're going to tell you that maybe in the future, we might have something called vehicle as a service, which means we are not going to own individual vehicles. Today, I want to go to the mountains. I'll order something which is a little robust. Tomorrow, I want to go to the town to attend a theater. Maybe I need something slick. Maybe the next day, my extended family comes, and I order something else. So this is possible only if the service is available very, very quickly in real time, which is, again, where data comes in, where AI comes in. And perhaps, if you look at the predictions, like Musk said something like, in the next 5 years, 50% of all the miles are going to be autonomous vehicles. In 10 years, 90% of it will be autonomous. We may not get there, but directionally, perhaps it's correct. We live in a highly connected world. All of you have cell phones and health monitors and smart devices, and you drive cars where your telematic information is going. So there's a rise of behavioral analytics, where depending on your driving record, your history, your specific characteristics, maybe your insurance policy is going to be a little different from your neighbors. And that's the world that we are going to. But there are decisions that are being made on our behalf, and that is what brings us to data privacy. It brings us to model transparency and responsible AI. These are very heavy topics, but thank God we have an esteemed panel today who's going to tackle all the difficult questions. By way of introduction, my name is Anandita. I'm a principal solutions architect at Databricks. I've been here for 6 years, and I work with insurance companies around the globe. So very happy to see you all here. If you have a use case that you would like to report, why don't you take off your cameras and click on that QR code and tell us what your top data and AI use cases are. But as an organization, we like to divide it into 3 categories of driving growth, protecting the firm, and introducing operational efficiency, because every organization has a need for it. We look at it slightly differently. You might slice and dice it differently, but ultimately it comes down to these 3 imperatives, and today we are focusing on the growth imperative. We are going to have this in in 2 sessions. The first one is going to be a short keynote, and then we are going to have the longer panel. So without further ado, let me invite Kranti Nekalapu to the stage. He represents Suncorp and has come to us all the way from Australia. Let's give him a big round of applause.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Kranti. I'm an AI practice executive at Suncorp. For those of you who haven't heard of us, we are one of the biggest insurers in Australia and New Zealand. We offer insurance through a range of brands offering different types of products ranging from both personal as well as commercial lines, from home, motor, and even lines like workers' compensation. Our motto is building futures and protecting what matters. And we aim to do this through our strategic focus on automation, data, and AI. We've been dabbing in AI for a good part of the last decade, but let's be honest, the last 2 years has all been about generative AI. Not because it's the coolest kid on the block, but because there's so much of untapped potential in insurance. Now, Gen AI is really letting us tap into that potential. So a couple of years ago, like almost 2 years ago, so when we decided to build a strategy around AI and scale this at Suncorp, we all agreed that we needed a strategy. Think of it like baking a cake. We can't put all the ingredients together and hope for a cake to come out. Now, we're talking about maybe a 12-month strategy or even a 36-month roadmap. So we worked through with all our different business units, identifying a number of use cases across our value streams. And our intention is, how can we really drive this growth? And one answer that came out was through very effective customer service and making sure our customers are getting what they want from Suncorp, the reason why they took the policies. They want to be covered when they are in need, and that's what we want to provide to them. Now, then there is this Spider-Man rule of generative AI. With great power comes great responsibility. Obviously, when you're doing something so good and so cool with generative AI, there are so many risks associated with this as well. So we need to have a good view of how to have controls in place to mitigate that risk. So we work very closely with our risk practice, and we've built a number of guardrails and controls that we can use to manage different types of risk when it comes to generative AI. We kind of divided that into 13 different types of risks, covering a range of things, like be it platform-related risk, or security, governance, infrastructure, or just related to use case, like how we use it, the ethics or the fairness side of things. And we had like 138 different controls covering all these risks. And our aim is to have or observe all these controls across all use cases that we deploy. Now, none of this would be possible, no matter how great the strategy is, no matter how good the frameworks are. We won't be able to do anything if people who should be using it do not get it. So we've invested very heavily in training our staff. Like, we had a number of training programs, not just for the staff who would be using these tools on a day-to-day basis, but also for some of our executives on, to help them set a strategy for their teams and be part of that journey. And lastly, nothing would be possible without having a proper technology base. So we've built what we call SunGPT. Now, SunGPT, it's not like ChatGPT, but it's the Gen AI engine that basically powers all our Gen AI applications at Suncorp. So this is when we partnered with Databricks, and we have built this platform, which has several different connections, sourcing data from different places, having all the guardrails in place for some sort of automated monitoring and governance, have all the frameworks that will help people accelerate, when we build these use cases and everything. Also got here our, executive manager for platforms, M. Cornack, who's been instrumental in building out this platform for our company. Now, where we are today. So in the last 12 months, like our financial year ends in June. So in the last 12 months, we've set out to implement about 15 different use cases covering a range of value streams. And as of today, we have 13 of them in production, with 4 of them actually going into production just yesterday. So we had a big night last night. I'll give you a few examples of some of these use cases. So the first one I want to talk to you about is what we call smart knowledge. Obviously, one of the main use cases for generative AI is these knowledge assistants. There's so much potential for knowledge assistants across different value streams. Imagine a customer calls a call center. They have a question about their policy. And sometimes the questions are very simple, and sometimes the questions are very complex. They would say things like, hey, I'm a nominated person on the policy. How can I cancel the policy, or can I modify the policy? There might be an answer in one of the knowledge articles, but when people are searching for that, people who answer these calls, they're not really experts in insurance. I mean, they don't read through these policies every single day. So they have to go through different articles. It does take time. And they do all of this while the customer is waiting on the call. So it can be really frustrating. At the same time, the people who are doing this, they don't enjoy it as well, going through such manual process. So we've got smart knowledge. So this is basically like a chatbot where people can put in question and they would get an answer within 5 seconds along with the reference articles from which we generated the answer. The feedback's been really good. In the 6 months this has been in use, there were about close to 158,000 questions asked in this application, and we estimate that this actually saved about just enough time to watch all 10 seasons of Friends 233 times. The next one that went into production was single view of claims. This is being used by about 1,000 claims handlers at Suncorp today. Now, given the position of Australia geographically, we're very susceptible to some of these catastrophes, like bushfires or floods. And when these happen, they're actually pretty bad. We do get 3,000, 4,000 claims on a daily basis, and sometimes we can even get about over 10,000 claims. So managing those claims is not going to be very easy. And sometimes these claims are very complex. They go on for like 2 years, 3 years. Average time is at least 12 months, even for lines like home claims. So if a customer calls a claims handler and says, hey, I have a question on my claim, like, can you tell me what's the status on it? Or even if a claims handler is reviewing something, it does take time. They have to go through a lot of history on the claim, have to go through some documents to really understand where things are at. And it can take anywhere between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on how complex the claim is. So what we have done is we created this single view of claims, which is basically a web app, where with a single click, they can get a nice view of what has happened on the claim. All the significant events on the claim, along with a proper timeline, any sort of next steps the claims handler should know about, or anything that they should be alerted to, that they need to talk to customer about. The feedback's been really good. People were talking about how this actually helped them identify certain things which they would have missed otherwise. In the last 7 months or so that this has been in production, this generated about 2.8 billion words, and that is equal to reading all books of Harry Potter 277 times. You can imagine how much this has generated. But we weren't satisfied. I mean, the accuracy on both those applications and even some of the other applications was pretty good. Like they're in 90s, which was still good, given the complexity of the questions and the complexity of claims we are looking at. But we wanted high precision AI, so we set out, with this aim of achieving 99% accuracy on one of our internal chatbots. So this is built on our policy disclosure statements. Now, everyone here has some of the other policies. So you would have received a policy disclosure statement, not necessarily have gone through it. It is a very complex document, lots of pages, so much of legal jargon in there, lots of images. And on a given page, on page 23, it says, as outlined on page 16. And there will be reference to page 77 for additional information referred to this. Or for additional information, you would also have received a supplementary PDS. You can refer to that. So there are all these circular references, and these are very complex documents. Now, when a claim comes through, if we have to assess whether the claim is covered or not, we have to refer to this. We have to look at what policy coverage they purchased and what's in the claim details, match everything, and come up with a comprehensive report. And sometimes these are so complex that the exclusions or details about how much excess they need to pay, these are all submerged in the details somewhere. So it's not very easy to find. And people spend a lot of time. And we set out to achieve 99% accuracy on that. I tried to negotiate to 95, it didn't work. I said 97, it didn't work. So we had to settle for 99%. So the way we got to that was, the first thing we did was agentic document extraction. Given the complex nature of these documents, so we built agents which understand the layout of these documents, extract all the information, contextualize that, and then create embeddings and store them in a vector search index. If you attended Jerry Liu's talk yesterday, Jerry from Llama Index, you would have noticed that this is definitely something that will save a lot of time. If we are to do this again today, I think we would use an out-of-the-box tool, given the effort that we have put into building what we have in production now. At the same time, we focus very heavily on building automated evaluation of all our prompts and all the outcomes we're getting. So we built our own AI agents and deployed them on Databricks. And we use them not just after production, but even during development. So whenever we produce an insight or generate some text, we are trying to verify, is this grounded? Is it covering all the different angles or not? So that helped us improve prompts further. So we worked on improving the accuracy of our prompts using an approach that we call PAFA. It's prompt adaptation through feedback alignment. So if you have attended talks on DSPY, then you notice that it's very similar to that. So taking feedback through AI judges, back propagating that, and improving the prompts as a result of that. And we build workflows with multiple agents or LLM steps in there, connecting different things, and eventually producing a comprehensive report of what's covered, what's not covered, and why things are not covered, which was very important. And this actually achieved 99% accuracy on one of our very difficult internal benchmarks. So that was good. So where to from here? So like I said, so we looked at several different use cases. We got some of them in production. We set out to complete the remaining ones, but where we are going next is we're focusing very heavily on agentic AI. So far, we've been building agents to augment humans. So we are flipping the paradigm now. So we're looking at how agents can carry out claims processing, at least most of it, keep humans in the loop, and bring in humans for any sort of escalations. So I hope next year by this time, I would be here to share some stories about success on that front. Thank you.
Thank you, Kranti. That was awesome. Can you imagine all these use cases in production? So this is not just the talk, it's the walk as well. So with that, I'm going to invite the panel to join us on stage. Let's give a big round of applause to Kranti, Porter, and Adrian. They bring with them a lot of industry perspective from the organizations they come from, as well as a collective whole on where the industry is shaping. So let's see if we can box them into specific areas. No, I'm just kidding. Adrian does a lot of actuarial stuff. You talked a lot about claims, and of course, I know you're passionate about underwriting. So perhaps those are the three different lenses that we could use. When we talk about growing a firm holistically, of course, the technology is important, and that's what we are talking about, but there are two other dimensions we kind of forget sometimes. It's the people and the process. Some of them are old, some of them need to be revamped, people have to be upskilled, and so it all starts with strategy, and Kranti actually touched upon it during his presentation. So could each one of you just give us an idea of how your strategy around data and AI is shaping the innovation and the tech adoption at your respective firms?
Sure, yeah, I guess I can go first. I'm on the left. So very similar to what was presented, actually. So from the standard, if you're not in the insurance business, there's several different types of insurance. You have property and casualty insurance. We're a life insurer. So our strategy really is where can we apply this technology that's directly at the core of our business as a life insurer, right? We don't want to build commodities. The way I use a lot of analogies. We want to build the 9 ingredients of a Coke that make a Coke, and we want to buy or partner for the rest of that Coke, right? And so that's our strategy. Where is the core of our operations and what makes us really special as a workforce benefit provider? Underwritings, claims. These differ from insurers and different types of insurance. So that's core to our strategy. And we built out the technology stack and the people training and the governance processes and all of these things that you alluded to earlier. Very, very similar in that. The other one, though, is to obviously mitigate the associated risk, and I know we're going to get to that topic later, and so that's very key to our strategy. We want to maximize the value creation of this and what we can do from our customer perspective, from our employee perspective, but also mitigate the associated risk of it at the same time. And so going after the right use cases and governing them, putting them in the right technology architecture, understanding how we're going to implement them into production, where do we need a human in the loop, where do we not need it, how do we validate, how do we do evals, all the way throughout the entire life cycle. That's kind of really key also to our strategy. The way I like to say is we want to maximize the numerator of value and we want to minimize the denominator of risk.
Awesome,
right?
Yes.
So
now, one thing we have to keep in mind, being very practical and grounded, is yes, we want to fly, but are we in a stage to crawl? Because the reality is we still have a lot of mainframes. We still have a lot of people using Excel. So do you give some consideration as to how are you pulling them along this journey of platform modernization, going to the cloud, teaching them new tools? Do you want to take a quick and then we'll go?
I think our strategy has been very heavily focused on data, AI, and automation. 2 of our biggest strategic projects for the next few years, one is platform modernization, and it's not just about replacing our legacy, or rather, heritage. That's what apparently we should be calling, not legacy platforms. Replacing these heritage platforms with modern platforms, but also, we're actually modifying our business processes to align with the capability that comes out of the box with these platforms.
Absolutely.
So far, people have been very rigid about the business processes and always tried to, bend technology to be able to implement those business processes. Now we are actually, shifting the paradigm again. Like, we're looking at how we can modify our processes while adhering to all the regulation, but use the technology that is at our disposal. And the second one, like I talked about, is AI transformation. Like, we do want to embed AI in everything that we do. So be it people using, people doing work on a daily basis, that could be in the form of, embedded in their Outlook and on Microsoft Teams, or the work that they do, if they're doing, if they're reviewing some dashboards or looking at visualizations, like, can they get insights in the form of, using AI and PI. So, yeah.
Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, you touched upon Excel, and I think like my role at Oliver Wyman Actuarial is both to help the internal actuaries, but also our clients become more data literate, get a better understanding of the tools that are available, but also to give them confidence to move away from spreadsheets, because within the actuarial world, Excel still dominates. Whether you're a reinsurer or an insurer, a lot of pricing tools, pricing raters are still done in Excel. Internally, we've got about 180 to 200 actuarial practitioners in the US carrying out reserve studies for corporate self-insured programs, and everything is in Excel. So I joined Oliver Wyman quite recently in January and was given the task, you've got to move them off Excel.
There was an announcement today of how a business user can drop an Excel file and use the designer offering so that everybody starts to get more productive. Yeah. Perhaps that's one that you can preview.
Well, yeah, we have Databricks, but people don't yet use it. So, we have a number of initiatives that we run. Like, the way we try to do it is you want to give the actuaries confidence of moving away from those spreadsheets. They love spreadsheets because it's flexible. They can do whatever they want. It's immediate. But the reality is the tools that we have at our disposal can provide that same flexibility, but then provide scale, provide more governance, which is what the business needs. And what we do is we run little experiments. For example, we recently ran a pilot with a tool Across 2 months, we got 25 of our actuaries involved in it, and it didn't. Ultimately, in the end, it didn't quite work out. It's they had lots of feedback, but you could see that as that's a bit of a loss. But the reality is that we got 25 of our actuaries engaged in trying out a new tool, and that's a win. And I think it's like it's those small wins that are cumulative.
Yes. The needle is moving in the right direction.
Exactly.
Yes, that's heartening to hear. And there are going to be newer capabilities even on the Databricks platform, making it easier and easier for people to adapt. The next question would be, we know what are the bread and butter use cases of all insurance companies, and you're kind of representing each one of them. But how do you identify the ones which are primed for adoption, especially since GenAI is all the rage and agentic workflows are out there? How are you using it, maybe in the context of personalization, because insurance is a very reactive industry, to use it to be a little more proactive, to kind of know what your customer wants a little step ahead? Is it even possible, or are we imagining too much? You want to go?
I mean, I think it's where we are definitely is we're at the early stages. I don't think we're kind of talking at that level, but in the actuarial world, I definitely see it moving in that direction. It will probably take time, but obviously, actuarial judgment is not something that you want to replace with AI, right? If you tell the actuaries that's what you're going to try and do, you're going to lose all of the actuaries, and they're not going to engage in anything, and you will not move forward. Mm-hmm. What you want to do is make sure you communicate that it's there to support and help to get, I still think like probably 75% of an actuarial's work is in data processing, is in manual tasks, and there I think that's primed for, there is a lot of data there. It's about organizing, capturing that data. Then I think in those situations you can then start to use more AI to drive change, and I think then the actuaries would embrace it.
Absolutely. So the hard part of AI is always the data. Anything you want to add?
We set out to improve the experience for our customers, and we wanted to achieve that through some sort of personalization. Mm-hmm. So one thing that we also started to look at is complaints. Mm-hmm. Complaints often are not the nicest data points to look at, mm-hmm. but that tell you so much about where you need to improve your business. Mm-hmm. And when we combine these complaints with call transcripts that we get, or the notes that our claims handlers take when they interact with our customers, that is a very rich source of a lot of information about our customers. So
your compass as to where you should be investing your time.
Where we should be investing our time, what sort of systemic issues we have at Suncorp that we should be addressing. So we're able to look at our complaints data, identify those systemic issues within our processes, and provide the feedback to the business so that when they design products or when they talk to customers about how we are handling their claims or any other sort of conversation, they're able to put these insights into those conversations and make it more personalized for our customers.
Very nice.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is it's not personalization, but one of your other questions was how do you kind of identify really great use cases? Through trial and error of the last 10 years of being a data and AI nerd and trying to convince business people to do things with this, one of the lessons that I've learned is kind of sell to the person that wants to buy, right? And you kind of almost think about it like it's a Venn diagram. The first is you don't want to make a commodity. I already touched on that, right? You don't want to build a commodity. You want to build something that's differentiating. So that's one part of your Venn diagram. But the next is like who wants to buy something? And one technique that I use, and I'll just give you one of my secrets, is where do you have mandatory overtime in your operations? I guarantee you have a ready adopter of somebody who's willing to explain and think about how they can fundamentally do things better, right? And you touched on this around claims. It used to be wrapping technology around a process. How do we reimagine the process based on what technology can do? The person that's going to be willing to kind of think that way is the person that is under a lot of pressure operationally, right? Their employees are dissatisfied. Their customers are probably frustrated because there's a lot of waiting time. That's a really great use case to go and say, hey, tell me about your problems. Let's understand what maybe the future can be. And I've seen really good adoption from a willing business partner there. And typically the ROI is palpable to kind of go on that journey as well.
make a change there. We are talking about data and AI making our lives better, improving the quality for our customers, but alongside you have these autonomous agentic systems now starting to make decisions on the customer's behalf and sometimes even on the carrier's behalf. So what kind of guardrails are you thinking about putting in place, or how does your company look at it from a regulatory, governance, and autonomy perspective?
Yeah. Look, I think using AI is almost like going in a race car, and we don't see governance and all these risk frameworks as speed bumps necessarily to innovation, but rather we see them as brakes. Just because they are there, we're able to go faster. Even if you're going off course, we always can have the trust in our controls that they would keep us on track. So when we started to look at these from this angle, our respect towards these governance frameworks has really amplified. So we've been actively working on, possibly identifying different risks associated with our use cases, and try to build those into the development process itself. Like rather than looking at these guardrails as something that would come in after you go into production, rather embed them into your development process, see what sort of controls are actually working, and design your process so that they always stay within those guardrails, and then take it further. Like you said, we have to crawl before we run.
Yes.
So our initial steps, the initial use cases that we looked at, there's so much emphasis on understanding these guardrails. We even have manual quality assurance audits after we go into production, just to see on a sample, like, did we actually achieve what we set out to achieve? Are we missing out something? We even went into the granular details of, okay, so people are using Databricks AI assistant to write code. Is it making them lazy? No, lazy is a bad comparison.
It's making them more productive.
Yeah, productive is a good way of saying it, but are people always accepting whatever it is suggesting, and what does this mean for graduates? Will they ever get to the level of that coding experience that some of the more experienced
problem-solving skills?
Yeah, the problem-solving skills. Like, is there over-reliance on AI? So these are some of the things that we want to quantify as well, and we've been doing some sort of even randomized control trials. I don't want to make people look like subjects here, but to understand, like, is it really helping them? What are those opportunity areas? What discussions do we need to have with our graduates and interns or people who are starting on this journey?
If I may, Databricks CISO has a DASP framework. Databricks, it's a security framework which tells which are the controls and which are the points of your pipeline and workload. If you've not seen it already, that might be something of interest to you. Anything you want to add?
I think you touched on something that's really important. It's oftentimes there's people that like to solve problems, right? Like all engineers do. Data scientists are very, very similar, and I call actuaries like the OG data scientists, by the way. We like to solve problems, and so typically what I've seen in the past that doesn't work really well is like, oh, look, I got this data set, and I know there's this problem, and I can predict this outcome, and look at all of these amazing things, and you go and you build, and then you invest, and you're like, hey, we're going to do it, and you never bother to pick up the phone to call the legal and the compliance department. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, did you remember you work at an insurance company? We are risk averse, right? Like, and that will put the brakes on like so many different initiatives. And so not only do you have to kind of bring around your business partners and validate that you're doing and the decisions are the right and the accuracy is correct, and kind of reimagine your workflow, but you also need to bring apart your other enterprise supporting partners along that journey, right? Very early stage. Like if you pull in a POC and you say, hey, I've got this data set, this is the problem, yep, we can do this, that's the time to pick up the phone right then and say, hey, this is what we want to do, here's the data that we used, it's in alignment with our principles, it's in alignment with governance. What are your thoughts on this? And you kind of continue to engage them throughout the life cycle. I think that's super duper important. It's not about just technical capabilities. If I've got a monitoring dashboard and here's the bias drift and all of these different things. And it's also just the relationships of building trust and understanding and education of what these things can do and how you're mitigating those associated risks and making sure that you're sticking true to not only compliance, but for us at the Standard, honestly, our first thing is our brand. Right? We hold ourselves to a higher standard at the Standard than that's what the law is. And so that's the first wicket. Like if we're going to do this as a company, what do we stand for? We're about fulfilling promises. That's not in alignment with it. We won't even touch it. We don't care how much dollars it's associated with.
Absolutely, absolutely, because at that point, your credibility is at risk. Now, if we look at it from the technology lens, do you feel some of the product offerings like MLflow with its tracing and tracking, Unity Catalog with its audit logs and system tables, like so that when an auditor comes and asks, what did you do? How can you justify this model going into production? That now tech is helping you aid the regulation process as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So I don't mean to hog the stage here.
No,
So I recently, so the Standard just started an AI team about a year ago.
Okay.
And I have some people on my team, and I'm honored to lead this team. It's been an awesome opportunity. One of the key reasons that I came to the Standard was because they invested in Databricks in 2016. And all of our modeling, you showed your kind of architectural stack. It's very, very similar. You just replace AWS with Azure, and it's essentially the same exact diagram.
And Databricks is multi-cloud.
Yeah, and you heard in the keynote yesterday, right? Like for data intelligence, you need centralized governance, and I do believe that is a very foundational capability to having these things run in production at scale to have the impact that we want to be having at the business. If you don't have that, you're kind of building what I like to say is a mansion on sand built on toothpicks and glue, and Databricks isn't that, right? It is a solid foundation that we build everything on top of, and that is a line in the sand that we will not cross as a team. They're like, oh, can we build over here? No, you can build it here, and then we'll send it over there. For
No
exactly that
shortcuts.
reason. Yep, no shortcuts.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, like when it comes to governance guardrail, when people are doing everything in Excel, I think there's already a lack of governance. So in that sense, like it's really about engaging the actuaries or the users to try new tools. I think it's really about engaging them really early on in the process, because I think where we will have blockers, where we will not be able to achieve the initiatives or the things that we want to do, whether it's internally or helping out clients, it's if you don't take the actuaries on that journey. And I think it's not just about showing that the new tools are accurate. I think it's the transparency, and I think that's where the trust will really come in, is making sure that they can see what is happening to the data, how it's being modeled, why are the results the way they are. And so I think that's very important, at least in the actuarial world.
Very nice, yes. Has there ever been an oops moment for the three of you where you have had to go stand before a regulator or explain something that you're not able to explain? Oh, no. AI works beautifully, and governance works beautifully, too.
I wouldn't know. I'm sure there's been situations at Oliver Wyman or elsewhere where that's maybe happened.
I understand. So it's not a very common phenomena because the controls are in place, and you're able to do business as usual and continue to innovate, whereas your regular bread and butter use cases are still running.
Yeah, I could come up with one.
Okay,
It wasn't
sure,
a regulator, but it was the
because
chief
these
financial
are the interesting
officer.
ones, yes.
And so this wasn't at the Standard, but this is a different insurance company. And I did have to stand in a meeting with the CFO and explain why our machine was making approval recommendations on things that technically shouldn't have been denied, right? 99%, that was our goal. You said high accuracy AI. It means it's wrong one time out of 100. And his question, and he oversaw all the actuaries. Well, it's wrong. Like, you sent money out the door that we shouldn't have sent. And you had to kind of, bring him back and say, yes, it did that. And what's the real risk, though? The real risk is we gave money to somebody that technically, according to their policy, shouldn't have gotten it. But that's a one-sided view of the world.
Absolutely.
Because what you didn't think about there is what's your QA decision score for your existing operations? What was your baseline? I guarantee you it wasn't at 99%. Right? You're sending other things out the door, and just having that conversation, and really just you have to kind of like hold that line a little bit and say, hey, I realize that I'm on the hot seat here, but also realize that your argument isn't fully true, and let's talk about the full argument. And the full argument is that humans make mistakes too.
Absolutely, just
And
like
so-
machines.
and the-
humans. Yes.
In my
Very
experience, like these executives, right, like they don't know everything, right? And you heard
Absolutely.
this yesterday from JP Morgan, like the higher you go, the less you know, and you lean on really smart people on your team, and that is so true. And so sometimes you just have to like be brought down to reality. And in this instance, the person was just like, hey, I didn't realize that. That makes total sense. What's our current QA score? It's X. So really, it's an increase of Y. And they're like, oh, this is great. But that was a really hard
one-
conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one thing that I do want to get in just to complete the conversation, which is like our business counterpart, bringing them into the circle, because they always say ROI, ROI. This is not fun, and me learning how to do autonomous agents and improving my resume, it's still like at the bottom. What did you do for the business? Any last thoughts that any one of you wants to go?
I mean, like just, in the pilot we ran internally, I think one of the things we were looking at was ROI. It's very difficult to capture when you're just trying to change, modernize the tools that you're using internally, because, part of it is efficiency, and it's very difficult to capture how efficient it's going to be. But really where the real added value is in the data capture. When you look at all these Excel spreadsheets, then, the data's, there's so much IP in it, and it's not just data, it's like the actuarial judgments, the selections, the notes. If you can obviously capture all of that, that's where you then can start creating benchmarks. You can start sharing these insights with your clients. That's how you really differentiate yourself. And I think once you start delivering and capturing IP, then that becomes cumulative, right?
Absolutely. In fact, we have a BVA team that can also help you and other customers capture this value, so do reach out. We are at time. I acknowledge that. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful panelist, and thank you for the audience for coming to the talk. So hopefully this is the last session that you have for the day. Enjoy the rest of your time in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.